beautiful day, and what a beautiful time to reflect on the 3 months that have gone by the year. We're a quarter of the way through the new year. It's gone by so fast. And to look and plan for the next 9 months and what we did, what we didn't do, what we want to do, and what we need to do. It's a good time, and I think that the messages that we're going to receive today are going to help us along that pathway. First of all, we want to welcome everybody. I think all of us have been here before, right? And especially welcome our speaker, Andreia Marshall. Remind everybody that Bezerra de Menezes is a non-profit. Everything that is done here, from the roof to the bottom, is all done through volunteers, and we always need help. We would like to welcome our dear sister as she speaks to us on strange morals. Okay? You're welcome. You remember, right? Left, and this one is the point. Okay? Thank you. You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Maggie. I always find it so wonderful to be here. I was sitting on the second row and I was staring at Aide because I have such a deep love for this house and the founders. And I get a little bit emotional because I always think about Benjamin. Marcelo has the highest regards for Benjamin, but I have known this family since I was a teenager. But I can really say that I have only really been using them as an example in my adult ages. And when I say this is the love for the dissemination of the Spiritist teachings, the perseverance in maintaining, withstanding all of the obstacles that comes with trying to disseminate such message, with trying to apply it in our own daily lives, which that is the true miracle of Spiritism. And so when we saw the chapter today, of course, it's always a blessing to study the Gospel according to Spiritism. And we took the liberty of putting this cover here because the Gospel according to Spiritism celebrates its 150th year this month in April. And the question that comes to mind is, have we truly understood the teachings of the Gospel according to Spiritism? The topic today, strange morals, is one of those topics that allows us to question this. About 2 months ago, during our Gospel at Home, this is the message that we opened. And I always had a hard time with this chapter 23. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys are going to remember some of the items that are going to be discussed here, but it actually takes a little bit of our time and attention and the need to seek and understand the meaning of certain words that were used by Jesus so that we can have a full comprehension of the study so that we can apply it in our daily lives. So it's no wonder that the topic was called Strange Morals. It begins with a passage found in Luke in which Jesus would say that whoever did not hate his father or mother were not worthy of him. Now here is a man who preached love constantly, love for one's neighbor, love for the enemy. How could he state such a thing, right? Here's the passage. A large crowd of people was walking with Jesus when he turned to them and said, "If anyone comes to me but does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not want to take up his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Therefore, anyone among you who does not renounce everything he has cannot be my disciple. He who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." And so when I first opened this passage, I was like, what? What does he mean, right? Due to the lack of maturity and maybe I'll say a little bit of laziness, I was really young when I opened this. I closed and I didn't want to think about it because that's what we do when we don't understand something. We put it away and we tend not to think about it, right? And then years went by, and of course being exposed to the teachings, this topic would come up often. And so we started to pay a little bit closer attention to it. Now, any student of the gospel, upon opening this message, would have the same kind of reaction. What did he mean by that? And Haroldo Dutra Dias, who's a well-known speaker in Brazil, he has come here. I don't know if all of you know who he is, but he said that when he read this passage, he noticed the little footnote added by Kardec by a gentleman called M. Pisani. It's on the Gospel According to Spiritism, we're going to see. And he said that his personal friend was knowledgeable in both Greek and Aramaic. And it was interesting that Allan Kardec allowed this note to be added because it helped us a lot in trying to understand this passage. Haroldo realized that the study of the language and the words used at that time was really important for us to have a full comprehension of some of the texts that we study in the Gospel according to Spiritism or the Bible or whatever we choose to read. We were with friends in Ireland just now, as Maggie mentioned, and we went to visit a group there who do all their work in English. And it's amazing to see the Spiritist movement in different places because we see ourselves in other countries. It's so amazing. But one of the directors of the group, she reads the Bible at home with her husband because he's not a Spiritist. And she respects him, but she also respects the New Testament because that's what the Spiritist brings us in the Gospel according to Spiritism. These teachings that we can find in the New Testament with explanations. Anyway, what did he mean? The Gospel will say that it's necessary that we remove the outer covering of certain words so that we can grasp the full meaning to the core in trying to understand the lessons brought on by Jesus. And one of the things is that Jesus told his stories, his parables, with common terms that at that time were used to leave an impression. So we are going to find a lot of examples of this in the New Testament. One of the examples that he will give us is the aspect of a rich man. It's easier for a thread to go through the needle's eye than a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven, right? So it's like, my God, a rich man is never going to get into the kingdom of heaven. How is a camel going to go through the needle? Well, anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. But here's what Spiritism says. Although very rare, certain words spoken by Christ make such a strange contrast that one instinctively rejects their literal meaning. And the sublimity of his doctrine doesn't suffer any harm because of it. It's what we did, right? We reject their meaning and we try not to pay attention, but the meaning is still there. When we reach maturity, it's when we're going to find out the sublimity of his message. And so the word hate, if anyone does not hate his father or mother, is the case here. The Hebrew language, as said, is not very rich in context, so one word was used for many different connotations. And so the word hate here was in reality to love less. So when we see this and we find the meaning, we see that it makes a little bit more sense, right? One of the other examples that is used is in the Genesis, when they talk about the phases of creation. What word was used? That the world was created in 6 days. Days was the word used. In reality, there were phases of creation. Now, when we read that, it makes a little bit more sense, because if we look at science and see how long it took, how old our Earth is, how long it took to come to where it has come, we are going to see that in reality there were different phases that took place. Very well. It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven is the other aspect here. So the word camel there, in reality, the thread that was used was made out of a hair of a camel. It's still hard for us to try to put the rope in the eye of a needle, right? You wet it, you try to put it again. Then sometimes you twist it a little bit to make it even more pointy or to get into that tiny little hole. So when we look at it, my God, if we don't understand it this way, we would never understand the lesson that was brought by Christ at that time as well. Here's Pisani's explanation. Non odit in Latin, kai or misai in Greek, doesn't mean to hate but to love less. What the Greek verb expresses, the Hebrew verb that Jesus must have used, expresses even better. It is not only not only means to hate, but to love less. Not to love as much, or as not to love the same as another. In the Syriac dialect, a dialect of Aramaic, the mother tongue of Jesus, which Jesus probably used more frequently, this is accented even more. It is in the sense that it is stated in Genesis, chapter 29, verses 30-31, and Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, N-E-O-E, saying that Leah was hated. It is obviously that the true meaning here is loved less, and that is how it should be translated. Furthermore, the text from Matthew clears up all difficulty. So this is in Pisani, and a note inserted by Allan Kardec, thankfully, that he did that, so that we could have a broader understanding on the text found in Luke. The entire chapter is going to surprise us even more, because the other item that is brought here is this one here on items 4 and 5. It says, "Whoever has left his home, or his brothers, or his sisters, or his father, or his mother, or his wife, or his children, or his lands, for my name shall receive 100-fold, and shall have eternal life as an inheritance." Then Peter said to him, "As for us, you can see that we have left everything and followed you." And Jesus responds, "Verily I say to you, that no one will leave his home, his father, his mother, his brothers, his wife, or his children for the kingdom of God, who will not receive much more in this world, and in the time to come, eternal life." As in every text that we see from Jesus, we have to try to find the meaning of what he meant to say here. We have to look at the thought that was inserted into this kind of text here. Now, what Jesus tried to do in every teaching was try to allow us to place the aspect of a future life above everything else. Because sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on the material aspect and the earthly aspect of how we live, true or false. Sometimes we get clouded that our reality is not this one, but that of the beyond, that we are stationed here momentarily, that there are certain aspects and circumstances in our lives where we are going to have to separate ourselves. What he says here, as an example to this text, is what happened when Jesus was addressing a huge crowd. There were so many people around him, he hadn't had any time to eat or drink, as it often happened. And so his mother and his brothers have learned of this, came to where he was, and so upon arriving at the house, they found this large group of people. They remained outside and asked for Jesus to be called. Now the people were seated around him, and someone said to him, "Lord, Master, your mother and brothers are outside calling for you." In which he looked around and he said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And looking at those who were seated around him, he said, "These are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does God's will is my brother, my sister, and my mother." Now, when we read this and we're starting the studies of the gospel, we would say, wow, that is harsh, because he completely ignored his mother, and then he disrespects. He said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" In reality, he didn't just teach or preach, he exemplified, and this is an example that we can apply to these teachings here. What would have happened if during those, at that time, the crucial moment where there were mourners, where there were people looking for healing, physical, spiritual, mental, who were just looking to listen to his words, what would have happened if he would have told everybody, "Okay, everybody, time's up, I need to go be with my family now"? Because his mother, although she was filled with virtues, Mary is this amazing spirit soul that had a very important mission, but she didn't understand the grandness, the greatness of Jesus' mission. For her, she was a mom, and he was her son. There was a lot of political aspects coming up because he was a revolutionary man. He was suffering all sorts of attacks. She wanted to bring him back to Nazareth. This is what Divaldo explains. Nazareth at that time wasn't a city that was calling attention yet, so she wanted to keep him out of harm's ways. Now, she didn't understand the sublimity of his mission, but he did. He did. when he was a young boy and he disappeared, and Joseph and Mary went looking for him, and then they found him in the temples, tending to his father's business. She says, but here's your father. What do you mean you're tending to your father? He's been really worried about you. And he said, you don't understand. He was tending to the father's business. So she didn't really understand the mission that he was called upon. Now, it's interesting for us to see, because the passage that we see here comes to teach us that it's not the fact that we are giving up on our family and ignoring our family or setting aside our responsibility with our family, but in reality, he came to teach us that it's sometimes okay to separate ourselves, that it doesn't break the ties of affection that unite us in brotherhood and sisterhood, that it doesn't mean that he was disrespecting the motherly son connection that they had. The gospel according to Spiritism will say that in reality he was teaching us that distance doesn't lessen the respect or the solitude that is owed to the parents or that the parents have for their own children. And so without Spiritism, we wouldn't be able to understand this kind of idea. Spiritism allows us to understand the teachings showing us that the bonds of affection are never broken because they reside in the spirit and not the body. So when he asked that question, he was posing us to think about our responsibility towards each other in humanity as well, that we should see each other as brothers and sisters. Now, he brought another really crucial example when he was being crucified. When Mary was before him, she was hanging on to John, because as you can imagine, here's a mother who's seeing her son being crucified in the most horrible way. He was being killed, and she was hanging on to him, looking for the strength that John was giving her. And she said, my son, what have they done to you? In which he looks at his mother and the disciple whom he loved, and he said, women, here's your son. And to the disciple, here's your mother. From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. Why did he say women? Why didn't he say, mom, here's your son, here's your mom? He called her a woman. And so Divaldo was explaining to us that he was breaking the corporeal ties that united them, because the bond of affection would stay with them forever. And he was offering her as a mother in humanity. And we are going to find beautiful lessons on how Mary continued on the work, assisting those that came to the house in the physios. I don't know if that's how you say it in English. Tending to the needs of others, following on the footsteps that he left for her, as well as with John as well. It didn't lessen the love that he felt for her. It was once again the final crucial moment of his life, a lesson for those that were watching, that were there as well. So it's no longer surprising that we see these kind of teachings and then we stop questioning, was he truly the one who preached about love and respect? Was he the one that was bringing us a doctrine that enabled us to see life in a different way? A lot of people become disheartened when they find a message such as this one in the gospel. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to earth. I have not come to bring peace but the sword. Right? When we first read this message, we actually start questioning as well, what could he have meant by this? I have come to separate a man from his father, a daughter from her mother, and a daughter-in-law from her mother-in-law. And a man will have as enemies those of his own house. Here's another one. I have come to cast fire upon the earth. And what do I desire except that it be lit? Right? Was it causing trouble? I desire except that it be lit. I must be baptized with a baptism, and how I am in a hurry for it to be accomplished. Do you believe that I have come to bring peace to earth? No, I assure you, but on the contrary, division. For from now on, if there are 5 persons in a home, they will be divided against one another, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. The father will be divided from his son, and the son from his father, the mother from her daughter, and the daughter from her mother, the mother-in-law from her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law from her mother-in-law. So the gospel explains that every new idea brings about opposition, especially if it's been trying to be implemented and it's revolutionizing idea. It's a revolutionary one. Now let's think back 2,000 years ago when Jesus was among us. Forget that. Let's look at it now. Have we put down our swords? As far as religions are concerned, we'd see many different sects. People who are proclaiming to know the truth, using his name, when they forget that the very basis of his teachings and his doctrine had to do with love, solidarity, forgiveness, charity. Aren't these all traits and characteristics of those who wish to follow on his steps of this doctrine that came over 2,000 years ago? Now, the gospel will say that Jesus came to proclaim a doctrine that would undermine the very base of the abuses upon which the Pharisees, scribes, and priests of his times were living. There was a lot of injustices going on. People had given up on faith. Christianity arrived when paganism was already in decline and was struggling against the light of reason. It was practiced in form, but people didn't understand what religiousness was anymore. When we see the passage where Jesus condemned sacrifice of animals in the temple, it had nothing to do with the faith, with the connection that he was trying to establish between those and the Father. When he said that he was coming to build the kingdom of heaven on earth, those who were in power freaked out. Who is he, a king? And so we see here that they would say that faith had disappeared and only personal interest sustained the way that people practice religion. Now, when personal interest gets in the way, that's when things get a lot complicated, because we see the same thing happening in our modern days where religion is concerned. Now, being that he shook the very core of people's hearts, this frightened a lot of people who were in power at that time. What is he going to do? What if it replaces where we stand? Personal interest. And so, over time, we have come to see that because of the fact that a lot of us have misinterpreted his teachings and his lessons, this kind of complications arose. It still happens today. It's normal. We are still in our infancy, spiritually speaking. So it's not a matter to condemn or judge any of us here. Let's remember that I say us because 2,000 years have passed and we have reincarnated many times. A lot of us have been in contact with this religious aspect in the past and have become indebted severely because of the way that we carried ourselves out. So here we are, and we have been in touch with the so-called promised consoler, the Spiritist teachings. Are the teachings from Spiritism, is Spiritism battling the same type of oppositions that happened when Christianity came? It's a question that we have to ask. People have forgotten. We have forgotten as Spiritism that the promised consoler is, symbolically speaking, Jesus returning to us. So the message of charity, fraternity, and love for one's neighbor remains. We can get lost in some of the translation of some of the passages that came, but the bottom line is the essence of the message of putting above, of placing above our personal interest, the aspect of a future life should bring us back to our Christian conduct, what we are supposed to do. And this is something very personal. It's something that only we know what or where we are failing and where we have to put a little bit more effort and perseverance in trying to overcome some of these aspects. Now, religious wars has been said to have created the worst type of wars. We were in London, and the taxi driver that picked us up, for some reason, Marcel is in the car, and we're talking about things, and religion came up. And I found it so amazing. I'm sorry, it's my husband, I gotta brag. But he was talking about the aspect of religiousness, that it should be something that allows us to see each other as brothers and sisters. That's what religion should be. This guy was from the north of Iraq. And he looked at him and he said, I've given up on religion. Because religion has been the reason for all the issues that have been going on in the world. Political issue, wars, economic, social. What does religion have to offer me? I prefer not to have a religion at all. We see a lot of people discouraged and disappointed where the aspect of religion is concerned. Is it his fault? Right? We have to see what happened. He never told his disciples, go and massacre those, go and burn those who do not act or believe in accordance with what you do. In reality, this reminded me, I was sitting there, of a passage when Jesus was going to be arrested. You know, when Judas came with the soldiers and then he kissed Jesus to show which one he was. And Peter, I love Peter because Peter was filled with passion and he loved Jesus so much. I'd say the Spiritist movement has a lot of Peters, and I'm one of them. I'm a Peter, I'd say. But he was so upset with the whole situation that he raised his sword and he cut the soldier, Malcolm's, ear. That was symbolically, when you cut people's ears at that time, it was the kind of punishment you did for people, for thieves. So it was kind of a punishment that he did. And Jesus told him, he said, Peter, put down your sword. If you harm with a sword, you shall be harmed. It was another lesson talking about the law of cause and effect. He wasn't punishing him and saying that was the karma. It was a law of cause and effect, and he healed the man's ears. I don't know if you guys remember that. A lot of people will say that didn't happen. But the message itself that he said, put down your sword, is pretty profound. Because in dealing with each other, when we don't understand or agree with one another, the first thing we do is we raise our swords. The swords of incomprehension, of impatience, of intolerance, of judgment. And it cuts pretty deep. And in cutting deep, it cuts the kind of affection and bonds that we should be building with each other based on the aspect of what the kingdom of heaven should be based under. The solid ground is fraternity, charity, love, forgiveness. And that's what he called his disciples to do. How is charitable understood by Christ? It's one of the questions in the Spirit's book. It talked about benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. And this is one of the main aspects. Without charity, there is no salvation. The charity that he talked about over 2,000 years ago that we're still having a hard time understanding and comprehending. We are going to find that when he said, do not believe that I have come to bring peace but division, the gospel explains what he meant. Do not believe that my doctrine will be established peacefully. It will bring bloody battles using my name as a pretext. Today there are no bloody battles. The battles and the suffering are that of a moral type. Humans will not have understood me or would not have wanted to understand me. It's interesting if we look at it at a psychological aspect of how sometimes because we don't want to deal with it, we choose to ignore and say that we don't understand that teaching that we are being exposed to. Separated by their beliefs, brothers will draw their swords against one another, and division will reign in the midst of the same family, whose members do not share the same faith. Now, we see a lot of this in our own movement, where we see how sometimes in the same family hold, a person will not be in agreement with this newfound doctrine or teaching or lifestyle on a religious aspect that one has chosen. Chico Xavier used to say, Divaldo used to say, that two spiritists in a household married is a luxury. Because sometimes it doesn't happen. And that's okay that one professes and the other doesn't. It comes to respect. But I can tell you personally that I have had issues with my own father because of what I believe in and because of what he believes in. To the point where we finally agreed to disagree and agree that we disagree with each other and leave each other be. So it's a beautiful thing when we are able to come to an accordance and say, hey, I respect your belief and you respect mine and I choose to hold on to this. Divaldo Franco had issues with his own father. His father used to say to him, you could be making so much money. Why are you spending time working for the government and then also tending to these kids? Their parents should be taking care of them. He didn't understand. Because Divaldo would say that Spiritism for him is more than just what people consider as sacrifice. The way that people live, it's such a sacrifice to live Spiritism. No, he says, Spiritism is my life and it's my hobby. People choose to play soccer or to go to nightclubs. I choose to do tech lectures and allow my mediumship to flourish and benefit of others. It's my life. And so when we understand this calling, we respect it. We allow others to disagree. His father told him, you are a great, great dishonor to me. Now, he said that he was very happy that he had both of his parents come to live with him when he was financially able to bring him to him. That his father died in his arms with his blessing for the work that he was doing because he finally understood. So sometimes it's a lack of understanding. I have a very close personal friend who said that in the beginning of her marriage, they had already 3 kids. She was pregnant with the 4th. And she was becoming more and more involved in the Spiritist movement in Brazil. And her husband one day, out of jealousy, said, it's either me or Spiritism. And she looked at him and she said, don't make me choose between you and Jesus, because you will lose. Now, of course, she wasn't going to divorce him, but it's it's kind of a low blow, right? Me or Spiritism is kind of, my God, it's an emotional blackmailing there. And she wanted him to understand. Now, what she did, she brought him closer to her. Now, he's not as active as she is. As a matter of fact, today they are divorced. He's not as close, but she allowed him to be participant in the teachings that she was having. Because he had no choice. The children started going to the Spiritist Center. So there's nothing he could do about it. But a lot of times we are going to find that. It doesn't mean that we are going to ignore, renounce, abandon our families. It comes down to compassion and trying to allow them into our world. A friend of mine was saying how she was having a hard time. She just met a man from India. She was moving from London to Australia, and he didn't really appreciate the Spiritist teachings. And she said, it's going to be a problem, because he complains when I'm online doing the Spiritism for Everyone with the United States Spiritist Council. And I said, yeah, because you're dividing your time between him and the doctrine. So he's feeling a little bit left out, right? I don't think it's the doctrine per se, but maybe it's a need that he has. We have to be sensitive to understand what each other's needs are. So she's going to be living with him, and that's going to lessen the situation. Oh my God, but I need to make him a spiritist. No, you don't. You don't have to make anybody, because the doctrine wasn't one of imposition. It was an invitation. He was inviting people to follow this doctrine. And the Spiritism does the same thing. So if we're imposing our idea on somebody, we're doing it the wrong way. The best way to invite somebody into our new teachings is through the examples. What is it that makes Maggie so comforted in times of troubles? What gives us the strength to withstand life's hardship? What is it that allows Aide to stay so young at the age that she finds herself in? What is the vitamin she takes, but not that of a faith of the Spiritist that holds her up? What is it that gives Leo the strength to face the death of a loved one? People sometimes wonder, what is this teachings, this doctrine that makes us, that supports us? That's how we invite people to our doctrine. It's not by the imposition. Peace will follow war. Universal fraternity will follow sectarian hatred. The light of faith will come after the darkness of fanaticism. Then, when the field has been prepared, I will send you the Consoler, the Spirit of truth, who will reestablish all things, that is, given to understand the true meaning of my words. More enlightened individuals will finally be able to understand, and I will put an end to the debate that divides the children of the same God. So Spiritism has come at the right time, appointed by God to fulfill the promise that He made. When He talked about the fact that more enlightened individuals will finally be able to understand, He was talking about the fact that we have reached a certain maturity where this promised Consoler will come and allow us to view what He meant to say. Now, do we understand it? Are we practicing it? Because there's two steps: understanding it, putting it into practice, allowing it to modify within ourselves. So the problem that Jesus encountered, Spiritism encounters today: pride, selfishness, ambition, personal interest, blind fanaticism, happens too within our doctrine. So it's up to us to see how we are going along. It must fight, but the time of struggle and bloody persecution has passed. Those that it will have endured are all of a moral nature. So they're calling upon us to raise the swords to combat the vices inside of us, no longer to each other. The sword to come and cut the ambitions, the pride, the selfishness. It's interesting to see that Emmanuel will give us a glimpse on what the symbolic sword means. He would say many readers of the Gospels are troubled by this statement by the Divine Master because the human concept of peace has been corrupted for many centuries. According to the definition, peace means having obtained external guarantees, which is a physical body may lounge about untroubled, surrounded by servants. And that wasn't the peace that he was talking about. He wasn't never going to endorse this kind of tranquility that allowed people to be in a dormant or impassive, non-proactive position. The world's mistaken idea is in contrast with the regenerative struggle that he talked about. So the symbolic sword of inner knowledge by divine revelation, so that we can begin the battle of self-perfection. We now have been given the sword of inner knowledge by divine revelation. So the Master came to implement the fight of inner reform inside ourselves. Didn't he say that he came to build the kingdom of heaven in men's hearts? A bloodless battlefront, which was destined to illuminate the human pathway, was formed at the moment of his teaching. We have seen our planet, our world, beneath these renewing revolutionary ideas for almost 20 centuries, for over 20 centuries now. And the fact is that a lot of us haven't started this battle, bloodless battle within ourselves in the process of inner reform. Yes, Christ brought to this world the renewing sword of the war against evil, being himself the divine source of rest for hearts united in his love. In the most critical situation, these men and women find a lasting serenity in him. That is because Jesus began the battle for the salvation of humanity, while at the same time representing the pillar of sublime peace for all who are good and sincere. Joanna de Angelis further explains, saying that indeed the doctrine he preached and lived by presented a new and strange moral. And that over 2,000 years have passed, and we continue raising our swords of misunderstanding, injustice, impatience. But she questioned, who gets hurt in the end by raising these swords? But not ourselves. And so, it's important, she would say, that we utilize the teachings of the gospel. And if by any chance we have been separated, divided from those who do not share our ideas, she says that in reality, our conduct serves as a bridge for them. There's no separation. It's momentary. Because in reality, his peace, love, and teaching is what will unite all souls entrusted to him. And so the teachings come today for us to observe the teachings brought on the gospel, trying to analyze them, study and live the gospel, peacefully raising the sword against our own imperfections and no longer against each other. So that was our study for this morning. Do we open for questions? I don't remember. No. The Way, the Truth, and Life is wonderful. This book here is one of the books that comprise the Living Spring collection. We have the Our Daily Bread, and now we have The Way, the Truth, and Life with 180 messages and teachings. And the symbolic sword is found in this book as well. We found it here when we were trying to get more material about this. And so it's a wonderful book, even to do the gospel at home as well, our study group in the Spiritist Center. Same style of Our Daily Bread, brought on, explained by Emmanuel. So it's highly recommended to have this in the table side of our bed as well. So with this, we leave you guys with this wonderful photo. It's a new movie coming out, The Son of God. It looks really wonderful, different from what was created a few years ago.